If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing to die for.
Tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unborn, and those who are the
How
ancestors.
long is your list?
So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self.
Panther 48.
What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us
Willing to die for.
that we don't have the
How
right
long is your
to
list?
claim independence.
Panther 48.
I believe that all people have principles, whether they realize it or not, whether they identify them or not. I think that what separates people is certain people recognize the principles that they live by, and certain people just operate on them through luck or or happenstance. They just operate off them through remote control. But they're there. And when you can identify them and know what they are, it gives you more power over who you are and the type of person you are and the type of character that you're building for yourself. But anyway, a principle is this. A principle, and it's different. A principle is different from a rule or a law. You know, we got rules, laws, principles, virtues, and values. So a principle is a fundamental truth, law, doctrine, or motivating force on which others are based. It also can mean a rule of conduct. So a good example of a principle is, well, I ain't gonna get into that right now. Now, virtue, I love virtues because I built on the 10 virtues of a student that we acquired from ancient Kemet, and through books like Now Valid Contribution to Civilization, or Bridal File, or The Stolen Legacy, books like that. You can find those 10 virtues, but I built on them real deep, and we organized our school under those 10 virtues when I was incarcerated. But a virtue, the etymology of the word virtue literally comes from the Latin virtus, which literally means manliness or strength. And it basically, it represented a certain moral excellence. That's what a virtue was. So it was something that made your character strong. That's what a virtue is. And a value is a social principles, goals, or standards held or accepted by an individual or class or society. So these are the differences between a principle, a virtue, and a value. Now, one of my principles, I'm gonna state one of mine real quick, and I'm gonna read it actually because I wrote it down. But one of my principles, and probably one of my first ones, is to maintain honor, to have responsibility for self. That's one of my principles, and I'm gonna read what I mean by that. To have responsibility for self, a man should hold himself to certain standards and have boundaries that he would not transgress for any reason whatsoever. This is called integrity, a firm adherence to a code, a state of being complete or undivided. You should try to write down your own life rules and live by them. A man should keep his word. He should behave with bravery and avoid cowardice. He should stand for what he believes in. He must be willing to live by honor, and when he can't avoid it, he should be willing to die with his honor intact. You must be a man in the complete sense of the word. That's one of my first principles. And I'll add something to that, and it just slipped my mind because I'm a little tired. But that's one of my first principles. I believe that that's extremely important for a man to be able to stand on something. And that's what I wanted to build on. And one of my favorite books is a book called The Art of Worldly Wisdom by Baltasar Gracian. And one of the advices that he gave, and Robert Greene quotes it in the 48 Laws of Power. And I've said it before that the 48 Laws of Power is basically nothing more than an extension of the Art of Worldly Wisdom. If you read the Art of Worldly Wisdom is wrote like the book of Proverbs. And what Robert Greene did, which was smart, which was extremely intelligent in my opinion, Because he took the otherworldly wisdom, took those principles and extended those sometimes one-line principles or laws in the otherworldly wisdom into entire chapters and created the 48 laws of power. Anyway, one of the things that Bartholomew Gracious said, he said, never travel with a man who does not have honor. And I can't remember the quote verbatim, but essentially what he said was, if you travel with that type of man, that man would never miss an opportunity to cross you for his own benefit. So he said, when you travel with a man, you got to travel with men with honor, because if for nothing else, maybe they don't give a damn about you, but it's their honor that will keep them from crossing you or violating the principles that they live by. So you can't travel the road with a man with no honor. But that's my first principle that I want to give. Y'all want to attack it, add to it, build on it, ask a question about anything?
Well, I just like to say that that kind of really, to me, goes right off the back of being a principled person in the first place. Is recognizing the concept of honor. And to me, when I think honor, that's definitely something that also grows with that. Get into, to me, requires you to have honor in order to be able to recognize the situations that you encounter in life that may cross you or stop you or try to impede you from being able to hold true to honor. So I'm in full agreement of that, is that we have to have honor. It's just the perception of what honor is a big thing that we have to be able to make sure the people can recognize.
I'm gonna tell you another principle I have. You know, sometimes I talk to people, and I'm trying to use an example of one that happened recently, but I can't think of one right now. Sometimes I talk to people and they may make a mistake in the conversation. And then when they realize they made the mistake, they'll go to try, say, you ain't got to explain. I know what you meant. That's why I didn't stop you. You know, because it's not necessary. It's not called for. The only reason I would stop them to try to over-explain how they went wrong is if I just need to make them feel stupid and make myself feel smart. But it's not called for. It's not necessary. So what I tell them, you don't have to explain. I know what you meant. Go ahead and finish. You know, go ahead. It's not necessary. And you see, that's one of my principles. It's not, if it doesn't add to the value of mental growth, it's not necessary. It's just not called for. I don't see the need for the intellectual masturbation if our goal is really development. I just don't see the need for it, you know. And that's another one of my principles. Yeah, I have some principles. If I'm crystallized, then I'm crystallized. Call it what you want to call it. Because I believe in order for a man, what separates a man from a boy, what separates a human being from an animal, is that we can have principles. We can make a decision about how we're going to live and how we're going to move, and the things that we're not going to live and not going to move on. And Bartholomew Gracious is right. I don't trust traveling a road with somebody that don't have any principles, because when it fits their needs to cut my throat, they will. You know, they'll kill me. If we get ourselves involved in a situation, where taking me under can save their life, I'm dead. Because logically, it benefits them to do that. I really think all this time we talk about the European way of thinking and the African way of thinking. I really believe that's the European way of thinking. I used to debate this white guy in prison. His name was Saul. Very intelligent guy. But he always came from the viewpoint, the completely Eurocentric viewpoint, that all human beings are selfish, and that all human beings by nature operate in their best interest. No one is moral, no one is principled, no, all of that, in his opinion, all that was bullshit. None of that existed. That people say that in order to hide who they really are. People say that in order to confuse you, but in reality, people do what they do because what they do benefits them, period, point blank. Nobody else. That old African people had the honor and all that. That's bullshit. He said this essentially, actually, that concept of honor and principles and shit that you say y'all had is why we conquered y'all. Period. That was weakness. We had strength because we didn't have all that stuff holding us back. We moved on what simply made sense, period, point blank. And, you know, that was the debate that he and I used to constantly have. Now, what I did was explain to him how he was right to a certain degree. He was right that human beings essentially, all creatures, all animals, essentially operate off a selfish impulse, period, point blank. The difference between human beings is that we have a higher level of intelligence. So we don't have to keep operating completely off a selfish impulse. Matter of fact, human beings, hold on, let me, yeah. Matter of fact, human beings have the ability to, human beings are the only creatures on the planet that evolved the ability for empathy. The only creatures. And we evolved that ability for empathy is what allows us to move out of that selfishness. It's what allowed us to develop things like principles and codes of honor and things like this, because we actually have the ability, and everybody doesn't do it, but we have the ability to actually think or actually look at things from another person's point of view. We actually have that ability. And empathy is a whole lot deeper than sympathy. We actually have the ability to see life from another person's viewpoint, which allows us to move outside of operating from our completely selfish perspectives and actually operate from a perspective of doing what's good for other people. Saul's complete argument is even when a person is doing quote unquote good, that it was selfish because of the good feeling that they got from doing good, you know, and I never completely agree with that concept. While I know that selfish imperative exists, but that is at the human being's most base level. That exists in the reptilian part of the brain. The first part of the brain that starts growing in the first 3 trimesters, that exists there, that selfish imperative. So that's the lowest animalistic form of man, where the ability to have empathy exists in the last part of the brain that developed, and the part that makes us stand out from all the other creatures on the planet. And that's in the neocortex. Empathy developed in the frontal part of the lobe of the brain and the neocortex. So it shows you that this is a higher state of consciousness than that selfish part of the brain is. And that's the way I look at things like that.
I would just say with him that he's currently, when I would have a discussion with him, I would say, well, you currently at this moment in time are just incapable of love, whether it be love of yourself, love of it, or anything greater than that. And I would separate his perception of survival or self-preservation, so to speak, from love. Let me tell you what my principles that I wrote down from, just so since we at least talking about it, let me at least just tell you what I wrote down. I told you what my first principle was. Second principle I put down was to learn to identify patterns. Third principle was to relearn what it means to be in tune with nature, which goes in kind of what you just got through talking about. Fourth principle is every action or non-action has a consequence. Fifth principle I wrote is to resolve all your traumas. Sixth principle, embrace critical thinking. Seventh principle is be solution-based in your problem solving. Those are the ones I wrote down to talk about.
Let me ask a question. You said all the principles you just broke down, I think are positive and on point. But there is only one that's really a universal principle, I believe. And that's not saying that the other ones are negative in any way, but I'm gonna come from that, and and maybe from that we could see something. You said, what was the fourth one you just said? What was the fourth one? I think it was the fourth.
Every action or non-action has a consequence.
There you go. Now that is essentially what a principle is. Even better than my gravity acknowledge. Okay, let's throw that out. That right there is essentially what a principle is. Now, this is what I would like to do. if that's not a, let's destroy that. Let's destroy it. Let's prove that wrong. That's what I would like us to do right now. Let's prove that wrong. You said every action and non-action has a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
If we cannot prove that wrong, that is a principle. Let's prove that wrong.
Let me elaborate on that. That when I say the word principle, when we talk about principle, that I live by. Principles, something you recognize and live by can also be a law. Okay, so that's I'm breaking it down like you earlier to the concept of it being my principle of a work, but it is in essence more than a principle. Okay, that's more than a principle.
Is it really more than a principle? Because a principle, again, let's go back to what principle
is what you recognize.
A principle is a fundamental truth. A principle is a fundamental truth, law, doctrine, or motivating force on which others are based. That's what really a principle is. That's why I chose the word. A principle is not just what you recognize personally. You know, that might be your personal code of conduct. You know, I have a personal code of conduct, but principles are all what they are, whether you recognize it or not. A principle is a fundamental truth. Now, what does the word fundamental mean?
You gonna say it, or you want my answer?
Let's see. Let's see what fundamental means. I don't want to say it because I don't want y'all shooting me down talking about Okis Gohan said in Physics 305 that this, that, there, another. So I'm gonna read it. Do people even still buy dictionaries?
Depends.
Huh?
I don't have a hard copy. I did buy my son a hard copy because I think it's I think it's something that should be necessary if you first getting introduced to them. Okay.
The word fundamental means of or forming a foundation or basis, basic, essential. That's what fundamental is. And a principle is a fundamental truth or a base of truth. That's what a principle is, which other truths or other laws, codes of conducts may be created on top of or may sprout from essentially.
Exactly. But again, when we're talking about this as it applies to, let's go back to how you just got through arguing about people, meeting people where they are. The way I listed these are based upon getting someone to recognize something that they should look at in terms of a guiding point in life.
Okay.
Okay. So when I'm word principle, it ain't, I'm not equating it down to the fundamental of law, period, or should I say natural law. When I say natural law, I'm now is when we start going into physics and quantum physics. I'm not breaking it down to that degree, because if we want to do that, then to me, you shouldn't even necessarily be talking about principles. I think you just should be talking about laws of universal laws. When I think principle, I think something that I want to have in the foreground.
So the question, oh, you had froze up. I thought you had stopped talking. See, sometimes you think I be cutting you off, but really you just freeze up, and I'm thinking you can stop talking. Go ahead.
I think what I said was, to me, when I'm talking about a principle, it's basically something that I use or that I think I bring to the forefront of my mind as I go about my day-to-day life. So that's how I'm defining the principle, something I'm using on a day-to-day basis, or I want to make sure that I employ as I live my life, as I make decisions based upon choices. You there? You muted, Psych. I don't know if you're talking. You muted.
All right, I must have accidentally muted myself. All right. Okay, so earlier I said you got principles, you have virtues, you have values, you have laws. Which one is more fundamental?
To me, when I think, again, it depends on what basis we're coming from. In other words, you got a spiritual law, a spiritual virtue, or a spiritual principle. To me, law is the most fundamental.
Okay, now to me,
a law can't be broken. A principle can be ignored. It can be ignored.
okay, now to me, now that's why words are so important. Words are important. I love words. Words are very important. To me, principle is more fundamental. Now listen to the definition for law. A law is all the rules of conduct established and enforced by the authority, legislation, or custom of a given community, state, or other group. So a law doesn't always exist. A law is something that comes into existence when people in power, I ain't gonna say unanimously, but the majority of people in power agree that this needs to be a custom in current or present day society. That's what a law essentially is.
Governmental
principle.
That's government.
I understand, but you understand, like I do, that everything on this physical plane that has been manifested in this physical plane is just an expression of something from a deeper, more spiritual plane. You and I both understand that. So when we talk about principle, that's why, and see, I'm coming at this thing, and that's why we probably disagreeing at, because we are placed the words in different places. Not saying you're wrong and I'm wrong and nobody, but we're placement. To me, principle in its basic definition is a fundamental truth. And a fundamental truth is something that can't be broken, whether you recognize it or not. It can't matter if you recognize it or not. And your number 4, when you said that every action and inaction has a consequence, to me is something that cannot be broken, whether you recognize it or not. It doesn't matter if you recognize it, you like it, it doesn't matter. It is what it is, you know. And the reason I harped on that, because the truth is, when I was incarcerated, that's one of the first things I had to accept. And as crazy as that sounds, and as common sense as that principle, law, custom, crystallization, whatever you want to call it, is, I didn't recognize that was real until I was incarcerated. That every action and non-action would have a consequence. I didn't realize that.
Well, let me explain, because we titled this "Principles to Live By."
Yes.
Okay. So to me, when I thought about it, I thought about the things that I listed out, or the things that I want on the forefront of my mind as I go about my day to day. Okay.
Yes.
So the point being that if you want to, whether we want to call it a principle or a law, there are millions of them. There are millions of principles in existence. But the nature of the show that we wanted to talk about are the ones that I felt, to me, and this is coming from my perspective, are the ones that I felt guided me the best.
Okay.
As I go day life. Okay.
And that doesn't take away from what we're saying.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I'm just simply letting you know that, if based on what you're calling, out of all of the things I listed, the one that's the most fundamental, I can accept that. But the bottom line is, when we're talking to the general audience, the idea is, out of all of the things that can be told to me, what things should impact me the most that I make sure that I'm able to consciously keep in my foresight as I go about living. That's why I started off with saying, be a principled person. Period. And so I listed mine in order of how I look at things in terms of decision making.
You know, when I took sociology, and that's the reason why law stood out to me. And I guess when my 2 favorite words in the English dictionary, I've said it before, is practical and pragmatic. I like to look at things from the point of view of which I can actually use, and that I can put into practice, that I can actually affects the quality of my life right now. That's why I like to look at things. And I know sometimes when I come at things like that, people think, oh, he's non-spiritual. No, it's not that. It's that my spiritual beliefs in, if I believe in aliens, or if I believe in Teutonic waves coming from my brain and all that, if I believe in any of that stuff, it's not something that's gonna buy groceries tomorrow. So I like to deal with things from a practical standpoint. That's really where I like to deal with. And when I took sociology, and learn something about law. Like for instance, in sociology, and I know that we might have different definition about this. In from a sociological standpoint, a law has not always existed. A law comes into existence when a certain group of people agree that this thing needs to be a law. Like for instance,
That's the observance of the law.
Weed has not always been illegal. Weed became illegal and came into law when a certain group of people decided that they wanted weed to be considered illegal for whatever reason that they wanted to. Now they use morality to demonize weed, marijuana, in order to make it an illegal quote unquote drug. But in reality, the people that criminalized marijuana when it was criminalized only did it because that it stopped it from being a cash crop in Southern American countries where it grows naturally. Places like Mexico and other places down south that grow weed, where weed grows naturally, even cocaine grows naturally, where their soil is proper for the growth of these plants. If these plants wasn't criminalized, these places would not be third world countries today. Because these places these are their natural cash crops. At one time, and I know y'all know this, cocaine was in Coca-Cola, or they used to use cocaine in dentist's office. If you did not criminalize the distribution of cocaine and allowed the places, I think it's 4 places where it grows naturally. I think it's Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and I can't remember the 4th place where cocaine just grows naturally. The soil is the perfect place on the planet for the growth of cocaine. If you did not criminalize cocaine and allowed it to be distributed worldwide legally, these places would not be third world countries today. They would not be. And so that's how that law came into effect. You know, and that's where I look at laws. That's where I look at it. You know, but the way I view and look at law, principle, virtue, and value is completely different than maybe the way that other people on the platform are coming at things like principle, law, virtue, and value. ECs being principled or having a principle that's crystallizing you or getting you stuck in a particular place. And I truly believe that the human being needs law to guide their behavior until the human being evolves into a higher level of consciousness. If you look at things like the Bible, for instance, in the Old Testament, you have law. You have the necessity of law. Moses, the lawgiver, he brought the people 2 major things that they needed in order to structure their culture. He brought them their history and he brought them laws to function out for. You're muted if you're saying something more. And then in the New Testament, you know, you don't have the necessity for law. Jesus didn't operate necessarily off law because he was a dude walking and moving at a high level of consciousness. Not that like he said, he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. The fulfillment of law was the refinement of his character to the point where law was no longer needed, because his character was so refined, he would not do things that violated the law anyway. You understand what I'm saying?
The rest of the ones you wrote down, so I have something I can walk away with.
Oh. Well, I just wrote these 3 down. See, I wrote a code of conduct for myself when I was incarcerated. I just sat down and wrote a code of conduct that I believe was important to that helped me operate. And one of the things, like the 48 Laws of Power, one of the things when very few people have actually read the book and read something that they never thought about, heard, or seen before. Most people say, "Oh man, it's common sense." But when we codify things, it's the way the human brain works. When we codify things, it helps us to put it in perspective. And that's why the book was so. That's why the book was so. That's why the book sold so much. Because not only was it practical and simple, it wasn't too complex, but it was basic things that we already understood as human beings. And so the 3 I wrote down to discuss today was, I told you the first one, maintain honor. I call it responsibility to self. I think that a man has a responsibility to himself. And that's what I call honor. The responsibility to self deals with, being a man of your word, living by honor, and when the time comes, to not die like a coward, to die with your honor intact, things like that. The second one was, I believe it's important for a man to acquire resources and to build power. I think that's extremely important. And the third one I was going to talk about was to always submit to knowledge, to be coachable. And what I mean by that is, I believe, especially for a builder, for anybody that considers themselves to be a steward of knowledge, that being wise has to be more important than being right. And
Say the thing again. I'm writing this down.
Oh, the first one I said it was to maintain honor, the responsibility to self. The second one was to acquire resources, to build power. The acquisition of resources is basically what gives a person power.
Okay, third
one I said is to always submit to knowledge, to be coachable. Because I believe that it's important for a builder, a steward of knowledge, whatever you want to call it, revolutionary, poor righteousness, whatever word, phrase that we need to use. I think it's important that to take wisdom, that being wise is more important than being right. And that even though over time, when we build for so many years, we're 10, 15, 20 years, we'll gain so much intellectual power that we can always be right. We can shut down any argument. And therefore, the responsibility to actually shut down our own power in the face of truth, even though we have the power to shut down truth and make ourselves right, is a extraordinary virtue for a builder. We have to know how to do that, and it's important for a builder to do that, and not to always seek rightness over wisdom. And to show you the ones that I wrote down, that was the three. So I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna give you these real quick. I'm just gonna run through them. And man, I'm a failure at one of these. I'm terrible. Okay, I call these my rules to live by. To have a commander's perspective, to view everything in life like a general. And when you view things like that, to me, it puts you in a different mind frame. You're looking at, the mission is to be successful, to gain freedom, to be successful in life. So every decision that I make, every single decision that you make, you have to make it like you understand that, as you just said a while ago, that every action and inaction has a consequence to it. 2 is to prioritize, to set goals, and then live life in a way that's consistent with meeting those goals. You have to train yourself to put first things first. A lot of times in life, we chase things that will give us immediate pleasure and ignore the things that require hard work and dedication. This is a recipe for disaster. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, do I want to have fun today, or do I want to make efforts toward fulfilling my goals? Because most of the time, we can't always have them both. The third one is to remain taciturn, to shut up, to be quiet, to not always feel the need to talk. Some of the greatest wisdom in the world is just in being quiet and listening to what other people are saying. 4th one is to observe, discriminate, and to concentrate. And I break them down like these. These are the stages of conscious thought. You must learn to observe phenomena, pay attention to things, drop or refuse to give attention to anything that is useless to you, and then focus your attention on phenomena so that you can analyze and synthesize the information gained. This is called thinking. Idiots have afterthought. They think after acting only.
I'm just laughing.
Wise men have forethought. They think before acting. You have to take time to pre-think. Visualize the situation vividly in your mind. Consider all the possibilities. What could go wrong? What could go right? This will give you the uncanny ability to see things before they even happen. 5th is to learn to use your outlaw mentality. Being where I come from and how we moved and operated. And I'm not saying be a criminal. I'm just saying learn how to use that courageous, born on fade out mentality to fulfill your goals. 6 is to raise your children. I believe that a man always raises and takes care of their children. They cultivate their children. 7, this is where I'm a failure. I'm a horrible failure at this, and I feel like a hypocrite even saying it. But to choose your woman wisely. I'm terrible at that. I do not know how to choose a woman. I'll admit that.
Now, is the stuff you mentioned in the Huru Shule?
Yes.
Is that?
Yes.
8. I thought some of that was familiar, but I don't see all of those in here.
I don't know if I sent you that. I sent you that.
I don't think so, but I'm looking at some of the stuff you put in the science of building. And it just sounds like
this is now because it's not from the science of building, this is from the science of manhood. This from the science of manhood. No, this from the science of self-government. That's what it's called. Because in the Huru Shule, I wrote a what is it? Science of manhood, science of self-government, and then the science of building. Them 3 classes on that section. Science of manhood, science of self-government, and the science of building. This is in the science of self-government. So 8 is to study your ancestors. 9 is to get your money right. I already said that. 10 is don't be afraid to struggle. Those are the 10 that I wrote that I thought was important for the fulfillment of manhood. Now, maybe one day in the future, in 20 years from now, I might get to a point where I say, principles are not required. You know, maybe I ain't there yet. I believe, you know, I like to codify things. That's what make things make sense to me. I like to put it on paper, look at it. I think if you're not, I really believe, and somebody had to prove me wrong. I believe that everybody lives by certain standards, whether they're low or high, whether they're weak or strong, whether they're Machiavellian or moral, whatever the hell they are, that there are standards that people operate off of, even if they don't want to name them. I done met people a lot. I meet people like this a lot. It's crazy. I even know a brother, and I ain't going to call his name out, but he doesn't believe he's a Christian. He doesn't like to use the phrase. He doesn't believe, he just simply has a relationship with God. He does not believe in using that term. However, he believed Christ is his Lord and Savior. He believed that he confessed the name of Christ, that it cleansed him of his sins. He believed that he is the way to God. He believed in all the Christian doctrine. I say, dude, you're a Christian. No, he gets hot. He gets angry. He does not like those words. Do not crystallize him into Christianity. And I'm like, in my brain, he believed the Bible is the inspired word of God. In my brain, I just don't understand how he makes sense of this in his own head. I don't understand it.
You want me to help you with? I think I know where he's coming from. He's probably coming from the position that the quote unquote Jesus Christ was not a Christian. Christianity came after that, because those are the people that basically uplifted his lifestyle.
And I agree. But Jesus didn't believe in those principles. Confess me as your Lord and Savior, and you should be washed of your sins. That is a Christian doctrine. Jesus didn't believe in that.
But I'm telling you, I think this is where he's drawing that point of view from, because he's looking at it from the Eurocentric standpoint of what Christianity has became, as opposed to the lifestyle of an anointed one. I'm just trying to make sense of that. And to me, for him to doubt that would be where I would think he would be coming from.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe I just don't have to understand it to separate the two. When I heard the doctrine, if I see a dude come out with a blue flag on, throwing signs with his hand, talking about Xing all the B words out of this conversation and changing it with C's and talking about cuz, and he's a Crip. I'm not a Crip. I don't, it just don't make sense to me. Maybe I am crystallized. Maybe I like to label things and put things in their definitions. Maybe that's the issue. People want to live in this infinity, and the fact is, the world that we live in this concrete reality that we're operating in, there are actually things going on around us that have boundaries. I don't see how we can ignore them.
We can't, but that perception though that you're dealing with, that you're struggling with, is called fluid reality. I'm not justifying fluid reality, but I'm telling you that's what you're struggling with, is people's interpretation of reality when they take it to a level of it being so fluid that they feel like they can recodify or redefine things on the spot as they live it. Fluid reality. Look into that. And make your head so you have something else to scratch your head about.
I think people full of shit.
I ain't justifying it. I'm just telling you that's what it is. If you really want to bang your head against the wall, look into fluid reality.